Welcome, everyone. I'm Andrew Lai. I'm your co host to the ROI from AI podcast.
And I'm Amir Nissen, the other co-host for AI podcast, yes.
We're so delighted today to be joined by Lee Hickin from the National AI Centre. He's the director of the National AI Centre, and they very much have the mandate of helping to guide AI in Australia. So, welcome to the show, Lee. Yeah, look, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, that would be absolutely wonderful.
Sure, happy to. Thanks, guys, both for inviting me on the show and letting me speak for a bit. So yes, as you said, my name's Lee Hickin. I'm currently the director of the National AI Centre. I say currently because it's a fairly new job for me. I think I've been doing it now for coming up for 9 months. So for me, which is my first step into public service and operating on the other side of the fence. I've been in the sort of private sector most of my life. But look, I've always been in technology. I'm 35 years or something in the tech industry. So I sort of remember starting it in the 80s and I was at IBM and sort of navigated my course through IBM and Microsoft, Amazon Web Services, and in between that, a few sort of small startups. I even ended up working for a San Francisco-based web startup in the early 2000s. That was a complete accident, but useful enough experience. But look, I found myself in this role leading the National AI Centre, which, as you said, is a division within government, and forgive me, we might get caught up in some nice governmental language around how things are structured, but a division inside of government, inside of the Department of Industry, Science and Resources. But we're quite unique in that we have a very outward-facing mandate. Our job is solely to help all Australian industries, but I guess with a specific focus on small to medium enterprises, those that often don't get the full gamut of support from other sectors, to help them on their AI journey, to help them figure out what can AI do for them, why should they adopt AI, and then of course how do they do that with the right thought process around safety and governance, but also not to overly balance between too much risk management and not enough opportunity creation. So 9 months in, I don't know what I don't know yet. I'll tell you what I can share, but I'll share what I can about what I've learned so far.
That was a really cool summary of your background. And yeah, thanks for outlining that for us, Lee. And I know you worked at some tech giants for many years, so it must be quite different being in government now. So just what are your thoughts 9 months into the role? Like, what do you think about AI adoption? And we don't have exact questions to ask you today, so it's
Sure.
pretty much unscripted. But yeah, what are your general thoughts about AI adoption today and where we're at?
Yeah, it's a big question, obviously, and I think there's probably a lot of avenues to explore on that one. But to your comment about how much of a change that's been, and maybe there's sort of a bit of a back point to that, which is, yes, I've been in the tech industry all my life, and so I kind of, in some ways, that's a useful grounding to really understand and have a vantage point to just the massive impact that technology has had over the last 3 decades. And we're not going to spend hours digging into all that, but there's no, we can all, however long you've been in the industry, you can kind of all point to some moment where it just kind of accelerated forward, or we just all rallied around an idea, a concept, or a technology, whether it be, virtualization, hypervisors, then the cloud, mobile digital services, and sort of, all those things. We sort of rallied to adopt it and grow in that. So that experience set me up, I think, to kind of take on this role. But what it never really prepared me for is, the process of selling products to a market is entirely different to the process of helping shape that environment, that market, that ecosystem, that, the world that Australia tries to operate in to help industry grow. And it's been quite enlightening. I mean, one of the funny comments I kind of got as I joined is this whole, government bureaucracy, government process, it's going to drown you, you're going to hate it. And I kept telling people, but that's what big tech's like. I mean, it seems like it's not, it seems like it's a sort of innovative chocolate factory, Willy Wonka's chocolate factory of technology popping up all the time. But most big business, and all the ones I've worked for are no different, are really heavily bureaucratic. There's processes, there's people, there's governance. Money doesn't just get spent because you want to spend it. There's process. So it was not that much of a shock. I think the hardest part to come to terms with in this role has been acknowledging that the work you do and the work you do in government, and this should ring true for anyone who's been in public service for any point in their career, you really do get a sense of two things. One of which is you are there to help build something for people that is bigger than yourself. And it becomes less about what are you going to achieve out of this journey? What do you make from this? What's the career path for you? But what are you actually building for the country and for the nation? So there's that part of that sort of altruism element that comes to it. And then the other thing that's really important is I'm going to be in this job for a period of time, but I'm not going to be in this job forever. And there's a stewardship mentality in government that says when you kind of start something, your job is to build it better than it was when you found it, and then move on to let kind of the next phase of it. So trying to just to ground the comment in those two things, that's sort of the big shift here, is to think much more about why are we doing this? What's the purpose of it? And it comes to your main question about adoption. Because one of the things that was becoming really apparent to me as I was, so my previous role was Microsoft. I was lucky enough to be in Microsoft in the CTO role as we sort of hit that November 30th, 2022 moment, and AI was sort of jumping the shark from being something that was hidden away and sort of minor to this sort of zeitgeist moment, this thing that the whole world was focused on. And it became really apparent to me as I sort of watched the technology evolve that the challenge here is going to get people is not about the technology and its power and its capability and how amazing it is that we're just moving so quickly from text models to multimodal models to agentic models to all this stuff, which is, nice, fun stuff. But the real challenge for adoption is in culture, is in people, is in convincing and helping people. Actually, not convincing. Let me take that word back. It's not. It's in building up the confidence in people that this is a thing that has a positive impact on their life. And I think, we can unpack that sort of adoption piece a bit more. But to me, the real challenge we've laid for ourselves here in Australia and across the globe, but I feel it more acutely here in Australia, is we have had a really centric focus on where AI can do damage and cause harm and create problems and should not be treated lightly. And, it's a risky prospect if you approach AI. We've leaned into that really heavily. And I think we've lost the confidence of what's possible. And that's odd because Australians have typically been quite let's just see what good comes of this next thing. So I think that for me, when I think about our adoption pathway and where we're at today, I think one of the biggest challenges is not the technology, not the access to it, not the willingness, not the opportunities, not what sits in our market space. I think the biggest challenge to adoption today is that we just haven't given ourselves the permission to adopt, explore, and learn.
That's really good. I like that high level take on it, Lee, whereby, now the focus is on, I suppose, using it rather than perhaps, bringing out a lot more regulation and safeguards. And I know that's obviously the direction that the government had gone in, whereby I think originally there was going to be a new sets of legislation, but now I think the focus is on utilizing the existing laws, and I believe there were quite a few of them around regulating technology in general, not creating one specific to AI. I mean, I know your role is at the National AI Centre and you're not necessarily doing the legislation yourself.
Yep.
I mean, do you have a role in advising on that sort of thing? And yeah, if you could let us know where your role starts and ends.
Part of a role. And let me reframe something that I said there, that because as you said it back to me, I kind of realized maybe I've over-pivoted something. I think the core, I think confidence to me is this word I like to use to describe where we're at, because I don't expect anyone to just trust me that the National AI Centre's got all your bases covered and you should just go out and use AI. I sort of want to create this environment where you're confident enough because you have access to the things that help you be confident. So confidence comes from experience, comes from clarity, comes from having the tools and the capability to do something. We get skilled in something, we get more confident in it. And so, but all of that is not sort of at the opposite end of the scale around risk and balance and governance and processes and being sure, we're protecting ourselves from the harm. So actually the language I like to think much more about is the balance, the somewhere in between, because risk is apparent in every aspect of the world that we operate in, particularly in the modern business world. It's all about risk decisions. And opportunity is around every corner if you know how to find it and seek it and you have the sort of confidence to go for it. So the point I was making is less about, we've gone too far. We shouldn't be thinking about risk, but we've just been thinking so much about the risk. We haven't balanced that with the conversation about the opportunity, and the two should meet in the middle with a balanced approach. But, you made some comment around where we've sort of evolved to. And yes, the National AI Centre, for those of you who've been long-time followers of the work the National AI Centre has done before I joined, they were the authors of what was then the voluntary AI safety standard. So I think back in, I'm going to say 2023, I think even, this was sort of the basis for how Australia was going to think about its AI safety governance, the voluntary AI safety standard, which was also at the time, signaled as the precursor to what was going to become the mandatory AI safety standard, AKA a sort of an AI Act, if you like, or an AI law. And I think where we found ourselves at is this interesting, and I think, again, using that word, balanced perspective, which is, we know that an overly enforced and draconian approach to enabling of law in an environment that is still very much in its infancy is not always going to be the right approach and leads to some potential outcomes. And we've seen similar things happening in the EU right now on the basis of the EU AI Act, and its sort of enactment is causing challenges. So, to think about where we're at now, which is to take that voluntary safety standard as it was, and something that the National AI Centre published was the guidance for AI adoption. So what we saw from the voluntary standard was, it was great. I mean, it was well received, generally speaking, but it was also way, way, way too long. I mean, I don't pick a big number in the sky, but it's around 160, 170, steps of governance that it sort of asked you to do for you to kind of have an AI approach or a safety to AI approach, which was belts and braces, but probably too much for most small businesses to even contemplate. And in many cases, overstepped what was required for AI and just really became about sort of good operational business governance. And, I think if we're going to help people get on the board with AI, we need to keep a bit of a focus on what's important when it comes to AI governance, as opposed to what's important about business governance, and not blend the too much together. So one of the things I wanted to do when I first stepped into the role back in May was to listen to what the market was telling us. So, and this is through groups like yourself, but also others, that small businesses want to do AI. They want to explore what it can mean for them. They can see the opportunity, but they know they need to be safe. And in order to be safe, they need to get some basic guidance, but the guidance was not basic. So we whittled that voluntary AI safety standard down into the AI 6, or the guidance for AI adoption. 6 simple things that you need to do that help you manage some of that risk. And I think the word here is appropriateness, like appropriateness for the risk. Because a lot of the guidance that we've been sort of circulating around the world for AI has been sort of at this AI developer lens. If you're OpenAI, or if you're Anthropic, or if you're, XYZ, you've got some really important things to think about as you build out AI. You've got some really important governance to think about. But if you're a small business in Geelong or somewhere, and you're thinking about using AI to speed up some of your processes, to manage your customer engagements, to solve some challenges around how you communicate after product support to customers, you've got to think about the potential risks, but your risks are so much more maintainable and scalable. And so our intention was to enable adoption by creating guidance that was very palatable, that was very approachable, that was not so prescriptive as it meant you felt like you had to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in people and resources before you could even build an AI tool. And I think that's kind of where we've landed now, is we're in an environment here in Australia where we've got good guidance out there. And the National AI Plan, which you'd both be familiar with, leans into 3 things: capture the opportunity, spread the benefits, and keep Australians safe. But underlying all of that is a narrative that is, and continually look to where should we be tightening the rules, thinking about regulation, thinking about governance. So the establishment of the AI Safety Institute, which was announced at the same time as the plan, has the foundational role, or at least the sort of an intention of its function, is to help that regulatory sort of industry ecosystem in Australia to know how to deal with those risks. So it gives it the knowledge, gives it the clarity and the capability to deal with where regulation needs to be done. But it doesn't enforce regulation. It helps us make better decisions as opposed to quick decisions, if that kind of makes sense.
Definitely. I had a quick question, a little bit off tangent. I'm wondering, the chief AI officer that's going to be mandatory at every Commonwealth agency, is that somebody who helps the government adopt AI, or is that somebody who's more of a regulatory overseeing and making sure they don't use AI irresponsibly?
Look, it's a great question. I don't hard and fast know the answer, because of course I'm not in the hiring circles of the government. But I think it's pretty clear, at least from the narrative, that it's about how does the government adopt and use AI safely and appropriately and in the places that make the most sense for the work the government does. So it's less on that regulatory side that you sort of mentioned there, Amir. But what it does kind of lead to, and I think this is interesting, it plays back to the guidance for AI, the guidance for AI adoption, the AI 6, which is, we often talk about these ideas of work. We use phrases like human in the loop, or something like that, which is sort of implies this kind of, you take this automated digital process and you insert a human into it. I think it's an awful phrase because it's kind of, humans don't work in loops. We work in kind of naturalistic human relationships. But it means it's about accountability, and it's about leadership, and it's about pointing the way in a manner that is kind of broad enough that can see both sides of the equation. So what I mean by that is, when we talk to organizations about their chief AI officer role or their thoughts around how do we make sure that you do this, the chief AI officer role should be someone or some entity or some role that is both senior enough that it can look across the entire business, so in the government sense, that's senior enough to look across the entire department, or at least have some purview across that, and not be bound by an IT agenda of get a product rolled out. This is a technology challenge. We need to get it into everyone's desktop, and not be bound by a risk and governance process that we need to make sure we lock all the doors and protect all the edges. It's that sort of role that sits in between and as you say, sort of shows the way. Look at what we could achieve. Here's an example I've seen elsewhere. Look at what we need to do to get there. Let's build the basic scaffolding, but let's also figure out if this works for us. This is a thing that is going to create value, create improvement, create opportunity, create growth, or, in the government sense, create a better way to deliver the services we do. So it's an important role. I won't lie to you that I think that it's a challenging role to do and to find the right person for, because, what is the profile of the chief AI officer? Because I think most people will go, well, someone who knows AI. Well, yes, but not necessarily, because we actually want someone that's good at organizational, transformation and changes. So important role, but I don't quite, I don't know if I could say that's the perfect description of someone that is that person.
See, that's interesting. The chief AI officer for the government. And of course, that reminded me that in a way, government is on their own AI adoption journey.
Mm-hmm.
And, but in terms of the National AI Centre, is there a particular segment focus? I know obviously we're working with SMEs, but I imagine your remit's a little bit broader. You'd probably also cover corporations and maybe a little bit of government as well. Is that your focus?
Well, on the government side, because you're absolutely right. The government's on their journey. We are not the agency responsible for the government's adoption of AI, but of course, that's the DTA, and then largely the sort of the broader Australian Public Service mandate around AI that Minister Gallagher's talked about many times. But we're obviously keen to make sure that what the government is doing is keeping pace with what industry is doing. We want to make sure that the guidance and the thinking and the approaches are aligned. So we work very closely with the DTA as well as others to make sure that we're not kind of telling you to do one thing and then operating in an entirely different way as a government. That would be, not where we want to be. So we are trying to keep those two aligned as much as we possibly can. But in terms of the segment or the sort of the focus for us as the National AI Centre, it's a difficult question in so much as the demand and the desire and the need is almost everywhere. I mean, if you look across the Australian industry ecosystem, from sole traders, startups, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, domestic large companies, international large companies, multinationals, and everywhere in between, Australia's market consists of all of them, and they all have a role to play. And more so, I think, my perspective on this is that they all have an interconnected role to play. I mean, in many ways, the small businesses will sell to domestic and international large companies, and they will partner with them, and they will operate to solve problems that they need, and they will also build new solutions that have a global market. So we need to think about this. We need to think from the National AI Centres. We need to think about the whole market as being the environment in which we need to operate. But of course, we're a small team. We have to think about how do we have the most impact, and how do we actually make sure we have enough of an impact that drives a change. And so for me, that has been about, and this is a bit of an ongoing process, to be honest with you, I think deeply about three things. One of which is, how do we help all Australians? So forget the industry tag. How do we help all Australians build confidence in AI. So how do I make sure that that sole trader, that small business, and my mum all are seeing AI as something that can offer value to them as individuals, as people? And I'll stay aligned to that idea about AI being about helping people, not organizations or industry. It's a personal improvement tool, in my personal view, largely speaking. So how do we make sure they all see it? So that's one thing I think we need to do. Then at the other end of town is the sort of the larger, how do we foster Australia's growth of being a contributor to the global AI market? So how do we build products here? How do we get more innovation here, science and research? How do we actually solve what we can bring to the table? And then somewhere in the middle, which is a combination of those two, is how do we do things that are both, how do we focus on segments or markets or opportunities that are both deeply important to Australia, both economically, socially, and sort of how we operate as a country, but also important to our potential expansion and use of AI to solve global issues and challenges and problems. So, for an example, something that's very important to Australia, our agriculture and our healthcare sector. Now, how do we make sure that our healthcare sector, aged care, for example, is leveraging AI to the maximum it can to provide for a future that is most, both economically viable, but also, socially viable for us? Agriculture is a massive industry in Australia. We should be underpinning that as much as we can. And then on the flip side of that is, if we're developing interesting things in agriculture, and maybe we're focused on some particular element of, animal husbandry, we've figured out something really cool that AI helps us with. There are many, many other countries in the world that also have agriculture as a major industry. How do we help that company that's developed that amazing idea find a global market? So it's kind of all those things that, it's just really figuring out how do we just inject AI into our lifestyles, our business, our way in which we operate in ways that are positive, create economic value, and uplift all of the lifestyle or the life conditions that we have here in Australia. But I'm probably giving you a bit of a giveaway in that healthcare and agri are two of my sort of personal favorite sectors because of the impact they have.
I was going to say, I know you've had a bit of experience working on AI initiatives in other countries. Which countries do you see doing this well, and what could we take inspiration from?
The problem with that question, there are a couple of examples, but the problem with the question is, defining what you mean by well, but also then the sort of what made them do it well is the challenge. So I think the obvious one is how India has sort of just completely taken control of its own small to medium enterprise, digital mobile environment, and is now injecting AI into that. And so they've thought very deeply about how do they empower the small business, not the big companies. But that's a nature of India's broad economic sort of scattered approach. It's a very large country with very different segments within it and operates in different ways. It doesn't have the infrastructure that we sort of get used to. But I think they've really figured out how to get down into the weeds, so to speak, and look at where problems exist on the ground in the real world, and put AI into the hands of, I forget, it's a horrible phrase, but ordinary people, the people that are just doing things as opposed to kind of the big companies. That's I think is really interesting, but it's a scale game. And of course, the amount of money spent there is, a lot of money and not always going to be something we could do. On the flip side, you've got Singapore, and I've always used this example a few times because there's no question, Singapore's often been held up as a sort of a digital accelerant country that just really figures out very quickly and, politically and economically very different to Australia, of course. But I really hold a light to one thing they did, and I remember this as I was at the time at Microsoft. Within about probably about 6 months of that launch of ChatGPT, which was GPT 3.5 Interpret, and then kind of the expansion of that to GPT-4, their first primary action as they were building the national strategy was to earmark, I forget the number, I think it was like 40 million Singapore dollars, but some large amount of money on literacy and skilling for seniors and older people in Singapore, because they immediately recognized this issue that AI will sort of inject this massive social divide, as we saw with mobile and digital. We know that most people over the age of sort of 16, 17 are not digital natives by any stretch, and sort of averse to mobile technologies. And that's a country that lives and breathes by it. So I think their idea that, the first thing to do is make sure that those are likely to get left behind are not left behind. I think was really inspiring to see from that point of view. But other than that, I mean, there's little bits, and I think this plays a lot to how Australia has thought about this, which is you look at Canada, the UK, Japan, Korea, Singapore, the US to a lesser extent in more recent times, but at the time, what Australia was doing and continues to do is consult deeply with these countries and spend a lot of time to understand what they are learning and how they're adapting, and to try and take the best of those processes. So it doesn't come down to be what is the best example. It's almost like little pieces of everything fits together to create something that is perhaps the best learnings along the journey as opposed to best examples.
That's really fascinating. And I like the holistic view that you're taking on AI adoption. And that was something actually new to me. I just thought you were focused on business in general, but the personal front, that's really cool. And I like that. And yeah, it makes a lot of sense because AI isn't just for business, and I use it personally. Everyone uses it personally.
Yeah.
But then looking at it from a business front, because obviously for SMEC AI, we're about small businesses. And in a way, I guess the thesis is that a lot of the corporations have the resources to have dedicated AI teams. Off the top of my head, I know some of the big banks have got teams of thousands of technologists that use AI that are focused on implementing it. But obviously with SMEs, and this is totally understandable, like a farmer or a medical practitioner, they're unlikely to have an AI expert on their 5-person employee list. How do you think Australia is adopting AI from an SME front? Do you think we're ahead of the curve here, or there's a lot of room for improvement, or are we potentially even a laggard? I mean, in our own experience, we go out, there's a lot of enthusiasm, but then I suppose taking the jump to actually implementing something in your business and using products, that's quite hard. But yeah, I was interested in just sort of seeing what you thought off the top of your head on where we might sit from a business perspective.
Andrew, there's like 5 things that just popped into my head as you were saying that, and I'll try and be briefer than that. But look, my initial thought when I think about this question about how we comparing to others, it almost a little bit of me sort of has a little bit of a shudder, in that comparison is the thief of joy, to paraphrase, and comparison means you're always holding yourself to a point of view where you're not good enough, or you're winning the race. And it sort of implies 2 things: that there is a race, first of all, and you have a chance to lose it. And it implies that our success is measured by the success of others or the progress of others. And I think that whilst that may play out if we think about sort of the geopolitics of AI, and particularly this moment, and it's easy to see that because the narrative tone of everything we see in the world is, to forgive me, but it's sort of the superpowers are competing for supremacy in this opportunity to be the most powerful AI country. And we can get ourselves caught up a little bit in not just the politicization, but the weaponization of the AI and the making of it to be a thing that I don't think it really is. And it sort of, to me, it comes back a little bit to your opening point on that statement, which was, my view is about how do we help people, and more broadly, the sort of adoption of holistic adoption, because AI is something that we as human beings are going to have to culturally accept as a thing that is now a little bit like us, because frankly, it's built on the words that we say and the way in which we communicate and the kind of mechanisms by which we draw attention, given the name of the paper. So it is like us. And that's really difficult and hard for us to understand because it's not software in the traditional sense. It is this sort of, there's an organicness to it, even though it is obviously just maths at scale, and we know all that, and we can kind of separate the two. But that's why I think, like, when we think about are we adopting it, to me, it always keeps coming back to this. There's two lenses to that. There's the are we confidently looking at AI as a thing that's for us, that we can use and we can get into, and then are we actually solving real problems with it? Are we adopting it in ways? And I think to your question, then, to get to the point somewhat, if I was to measure Australia in any way, I'd say that by all measures, people might say we're not adopting it as fast as the other countries. And you can sort of see this sort of the UK and India and the US certainly, and probably many other countries, sort of AI is in finding its way into everything they do, and it's becoming the sort of the basis of any innovation. I think what I'm liking, at least from my lens, what I'm seeing in Australia is we're not probably adopting it with the veracity of other countries, but we're focusing on solving very specific problems with it. And I think part of our lack of sort of running towards the prize is probably because we've stopped and gone, well, hold on a second, what are we going to do with this? What actually is the thing that we're going to solve with it? And so I see in Australia a lot more focus on AI doing things like supporting underserved communities, investing in healthcare. I mean, Harrison AI, Heidi AI, Lens are good examples where we see some of those things. But they're big examples now, really, not even small examples. But healthcare, supporting social and sort of lifestyle issues, getting involved in things that actually have a tangible impact in improving our lives. I mean, yes, we're doing some of the customer service stuff and other things, but actually I find most of the interesting stories that pop out of Australia are so specific to sorting out some sort of social issue or demographical issue around the challenges we have as a country. They maybe don't get the airtime that they might get on X and other platforms where, it's the latest vibe coder telling you that they've basically gotten rid of all their coders because AI solved a new problem for them. That's cool and interesting to a tech industry, frightening also, but it doesn't actually solve any real world problems. It actually just, it kind of creates, actually, I won't go down that path. I just think that the very core of your question is, I think Australia is adopting it in the right places, maybe not as fast as other countries, but I think we're doing mostly the right things with it.
Given you've been in the tech industry a long time, where do you place AI in terms of impact? Like, is it on par with cloud and mobile, or is it all the way up to the industrial revolution in terms of scale, or is it bigger, or how do you?
That's a really good question. It's a really important question. Thank you, Amir. I love that question. Because this is one that I vacillate on quite a lot, in so much as I'm a tech optimist. I've never made a sort of hidden that point, and I look for what is the upside and the potential for what AI can do and what technology can do generally. I just find technology to be such an enabler of the modern life and the way we live. It's created a career for me, but it's also created a life that was so different from my parents or others before then. On the AI side of things, so look, I'm a software engineer by trade. That was my sort of first word. I used to write in COBOL, which tells you how old I was. But so I think about it. I think about AI from the point of view of being software, and I recognize that it is doing things because that is fundamentally how the model architecture programming, machine learning framework works. I get that it's doing that. But I do recall as well those first days when we first got ChatGPT 4 and the voice enablement, and it was when we got to the point where you could actually interrupt it. If you remember, it was kind of like an early iteration of Chat 4, and you could interrupt it and have a conversation with it. And I remember sitting right where I am right now, I have my phone on my stand, and I was chatting away to it. So I just got access to an early release of it. And I was talking to it about movies, just chatting about good movies, bad movies, what are the favorite movies. And about 10 minutes in, I kind of realized I was just chatting away. I wasn't really thinking to myself, say it like this, speaking like a computer needs to hear and making sure you say all the words properly I was just chatting. And I've kind of had that moment of like, oh, okay, hold on a second. This is really cool. This is a uniquely interesting prospect. And so I don't get myself too lost in the, it's got conscious, it's thinking, it's a thing. Like, it's not a thing. It is still software. I turn it off, it stops working. It doesn't have any intentionality beyond that. I turn my phone off, done. But I have to admit and accept the fact that it completely changes the way in which I can intersect with digital and information and technology and services. And I can now explore ideas, concepts, knowledge, learning in ways that I could never do before, in a way that is so inherently native to me, because it's my voice and my speaking, and it's not even typing anymore. I speak to AI more than I type it right now. I don't know what your personal preference is, but I find I speak to it more. And so I have to, from that point of view, I have to kind of accept that it is just software, but it is pretty. If we put it in the right places and think about it, like I think about I've got a 19-year-old son about to enter the real world. It's going to smack him in the face really hard soon enough. And I think about, one hand, the impact that AI might have. Does it mean that he can't get jobs? Does it mean that he will have to think differently about a career path? Will it mean that the doors that are open to him are very different? And on the flip side, I also think to myself, if he wanted to sit and learn how to become a space aeronautical engineer in his own time, he has the tools to do that now. He could sit at home and learn how to do that. Maybe that's not a good example, but you kind of get my point. Like, you could just develop any new skill. And so I look at it and go, well, that is a pretty incredible moment in time where if you have access to a device and the network and the internet, and I appreciate those are ifs, even in our rich country that not everybody has, there really is no limit to what you could do. And that is something that no other technology before, cloud, mobile, computers, I mean, they always were limited by some factor of either the system behind them or the person in front of them. And now the limit is gone. I mean, that to me is pretty incredible. So, but if I can, since this is a sort of a podcast, I'll throw the question back to you, because I love to get other people's view, because I get lost in my own kind of mind on this. What do you guys think? I mean, do you think it's majorly different, or do you think it's just another tech?
Well, I was going to say, I run these programs for AI founders, right? And every cohort has to be updated because the landscape is moving so fast. But I remember in the cohort, which was a year ago, I said, it's a pretty big shift happening now. Maybe it's on par with mobile and cloud, or maybe it's got the potential to be all the way up to the Industrial Revolution, that impactful. And now I'm very much, this is minimum Industrial Revolution and possibly more.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Andrew?
I think I'm on board with that as well. In a way, the smartphone revolution and the cloud revolution, these were almost like stepping stones that led up to this, right?
Yeah.
And so when the smartphone revolution occurred, that didn't change my daily life. I mean, I was still working in Excel at work, or, using documents, but now it's fundamentally changed my everyday processes. So I think when the smartphones came, I was just reading stuff in bed as opposed to getting up and reading stuff on the computer. But now, things have just fundamentally changed.
And it's interesting you say it that way, because you're right. I mean, if you think long enough about it, yes, of course, when they introduced desktop computers and then we introduced mobile devices and we got internet, any of these moments, you kind of go, well, it hasn't really changed that much, but it did over time, and it has created shifts, but it's a managed shift, and there's still a sort of a rigidity to both sides of it. A computer's still a computer, device is still a device, runs out of battery after 15 hours, and I can't do anything. And we're still limited by some of those physical and other attributes to it. But I like, the Industrial Revolution narrative, and again, these superlatives are great. People love it when you use them because they kind of that sort of makes it seem so much bigger. In some ways, I'd argue that's even bigger than the Industrial Revolution, because it's the impact is so much more. Like, industrial revolutions have only, from the first one, which of course, really only impacted the very rich in many ways and kind of made the poor poorer and the rich richer. But then we've sort of seen this disaggregation of it, and became more accessible to have more things, and our mobile devices are everywhere. And so this one, if we do it right, if we were to think about the sort of the very global social kind of humanity aspect of what we could do with this, you have the opportunity potentially to sort of, I won't say level the playing field, that's an unfair framing of it, but to make the barriers to accessing information disappear for almost everyone in the world, because you no longer need to have access to certain things. You just need to have the means by which you can communicate to an AI device, and we all can communicate in any language that we choose to. So yeah, I don't know, you maybe swung me more, Amir, towards the kind of the hyperbolic, it is the most amazing moment, and we just sort of crap on that. Yes, exactly. But it is pretty incredible. I think there's no doubt about it. I mean, it is. So I'll give you an example. Sorry, and that's what you ask it. My 81-year-old mother, she's staying with me at the moment. Never used AI, of course, in her life. She uses technology because you have to. And she came to me with a sheet of paper. She's a secretary at the golf club. She's a sheet of paper with 100 names on it and email addresses, but just some handwritten, some printed, some scrubbed out. And she said, I've got to put these into a file because I need to be able to contact them all and manage it. I'm like, hold on. So I grabbed my phone, ChatGPT. I just took a picture of the piece of paper and said, and it came back and said to me, it's a little blurry. Can you take 2 separate photos, top and bottom, so I can read it more clearly? I'm like, yeah, sure. Photo. Then it's presented this thing to it. And then it says, then it gives it the document. It says to it, would you like me to organize them alphabetically? I see some of them are scrubbed out. Would you like me to mark them as scrubbed out, or, and no longer on this? And you could see her just going, how is technology doing that? We live in a bit of a bubble, but when you see that impact on ordinary people like my mom, it's pretty incredible.
Totally true. And Lee, I mean, as you were speaking, it got me thinking about it. And given how wide your remit is, with regards to the National AI Centre. What are your thoughts about AGI, and are you looking out for it? Do you think it's coming soon? I know there's predictions where some people think it'll be in 6 months, it'll be in 10 years. So there's a whole range. What are your thoughts on it, and also the impacts to Australia?
Well, on the point of AGI, I don't believe that we'll ever build AGI because I think that we are fundamentally hardwired as a species to disallow anything that we consider to be more intelligent than us. By any measure today, Claude, Gemini, ChatGPT, Copilot on my device is infinitely more intelligent than I am in terms of its ability to think through problems. It has much more information at hand. It can assimilate information in ways that I couldn't even dream of. Is it generally intelligent? Yes. Is it entirely artificial? Yes. Could I use it to do pretty much anything my heart's desire? Yes. Will it get it always right? No, probably not. So to some degree, we already have what I would call artificial general intelligence. But I appreciate that the world likes to sort of, and we have William Fitzgibbon and others to thank for this idea of singularity and concepts of an AI reaching a point. I think there's two elements to it, which is that there's can we build the technology to do it? As in, can we solve some of the fundamental problems? And let's not forget, we're still basically using transformer architecture from 2017 in the problems we solve today. And we know there are fundamental flaws in the way the attention head model works, but it's still pretty impressive and we've barely scratched the surface. So can we build the technology? Can we build beyond where we are today? And then probably more difficult is, can we accept it as an intelligent life form on this planet? Because AGI by intention implies something that is more intelligent than us. If we think about superintelligence or general intelligence, but by the measures, we're sort of saying it's more intelligent than us. So I don't think we'll ever get there. I don't like the framing of it, but it helps to have something so we can all strive towards a goal. And here in Australia, that's the same as anywhere else in the world. Since I don't think it exists, I can't probably comment on whether I think it matters in Australia.
Very cool, very cool. And you did mention a couple of use cases that you yourself, when you showed your mum and taking the photos. What is your favorite AI use case, and what you said you voice as well?
Yeah, there's sort of two things. There's what I use it for, in my day, because that's the question I get asked and I happen to answer because it's probably the worst and most pathetic and boring example. It's my intelligence crutch because I know I don't know everything, and I know there's a lot of things, and particularly my new job, I hear a lot of stuff and concepts and ideas and things. And so my AI is my go-to for micro-learning, for improving my own base knowledge of the world or concepts or ideas. So I don't really use it to write stuff for me. I don't really use it to kind of construct a lot of the work I do, but I use it a lot to help me do my job better and understand the world that is operating around me faster and more intelligently, so that I can suddenly appear in a room, in a board meeting, in a session with some degree of knowledge that the AI has given me, that I intersect with forgive the overly dramatic phrasing, my humanity, because I think that's the unique part of it, is when you kind of take all that cool information you can gather in a second, but then you kind of apply a lens of, but let me put that in the context of the room I'm in and the people I'm with and the scenario I'm facing. That's the beauty of it. So for me, again, I often say it's a self-improvement tool for me. That's how I use it. But in terms of the use cases that I see around, one that popped up and it's sort of quite prescient right now, just given the fact the Winter Olympic Games have just finished, and something that Queensland, I think it's Queensland University is doing. Actually, I've got the thing up here on the page somewhere, but no, it's the Queensland Academy of Sports, and in their pursuit to find new Olympians for the Brisbane 2032 Games. And in a country like Australia, where there's some amazing athlete who lives out in the back of Burke somewhere that has no opportunity to connect to the world and demonstrate what they can do sporting wise, or that it just takes a micro moment for their life to change. But that moment is so hard for them to come by. They developed an app, and I think it's called something about You for 2032. And it's an AI app where they can video themselves doing the sports that they do. And it has inbuilt analytics on their sort of their movements, and so it's monitoring their performance. So a proper sports coach, athlete, can look at the video and actually kind of not just see a person running, but also go, like, their technique is very close to what we need for that's Olympic level running. They just need to be improved. And I think of that and I go, I would never think of an idea like that, but creating this opportunity for anyone in Australia to be the next Kathy Freeman, the next Olympian, that's I wouldn't say solving a problem, but creating an amazing opportunity and using AI to put something that isn't in regional towns in regional towns. So yeah, I love that one. I think it's a really good one.
That's a really cool use case. I haven't heard of that one before. We've probably got time for one or two more questions from Amir and I.
Mhm.
But I guess I wanted to also make sure we've talked about, the cool use cases now, what you're currently doing. But then in terms of AI adoption for the future, what's
Yeah.
your vision of AI adoption from the national AI perspective for Australia coming up in the next 5 years?
Well, simple terms, more of it. Lots of people exploring, experimenting, and learning what AI can and, more importantly, can't do. That's the sort of the engineer in me that kind of looks to a problem by taking it apart and figuring out how it's made, and then you figure out how to put it back together again. But I think, we need to sort of take that lens with AI. So look, clearly more adoption, more usage, more confidence in our country that AI, that we've got the balance right. To get to my point earlier about balance, that the risks are real but manageable. The opportunity is potential and it's achievable. And I think that balance of those two things is where I seek to help more Australians find their path towards. And I think that the adoption is probably going to lend itself to two things, one of which is how do more Australians use AI in their day to get more time to do things that actually matter more to them. So, to the ordinary and everybody in Australia, if AI can find its way to helping you have a little bit less time spent on home finances and finding the next best deal for your insurance and figuring out how to cook meals for your kids and all those things that we do, if AI does that and gives you back half an hour in your life, frankly, that's actually worth it. That's good value. And then kind of more on the industry side, that if we can create an ecosystem in Australia that both fosters innovation in our existing small and medium enterprises to seek ways to use AI to grow their piece of the pie, grow their market. That creates more Australian startups that are willing to take that risk because they're confident that they've got the backing of the government and the support they need. And, I think that there's those that are going to solve whole new problems with AI. Like, there's a lot of smart innovators in Australia that are already in an ecosystem around one of our big industries, resources, health, whatever it is, education. And they can see a problem in front of them and they just need the permission to kind of use AI to solve that problem and create something that is better than it is today. I think if we had that lens of doing it for the right reasons, everybody finding a way to improve their lives, and we just create more for all, more opportunity for Australians economically and life, in terms of their life as well. But then that will be as good a measure as just simply the number of, more Australians are using AI, which is important, but not really the measure. I think the measure is actually in what they're using it for, not whether they're using it.
All right, so I guess I get the last question. You mentioned at the start you've 35 years, I think you said, in the private sector before taking this new
Yep.
role. And in some ways it's similar to the large enterprises, which are quite bureaucratic. What surprised you most about your time at Nike, working from the inside as opposed to the outside?
As in, what surprised me most coming into government and
Yes.
working government, yeah. Two things. So I'll give you a yin and a yang. What surprised me most was just how busy and active and engaged and passionate the people in government are. And I mean, not just the public servants that, I operate within the APS, but also the elected officials and the ministers and the people that I have to kind of, that work on the other side of the government. Like, it's easy from the outside to kind of only see the headlines and see the things that didn't happen. But inside of government, you realize and you see just how much work gets done in getting to a point where something can be delivered. And you realize that, putting something out like new guidance for AI. In the private sector, you just kind of write it, you get it approved by legal, and then you'd be out there trying to figure out how to put it into market. But here, you have to think about all of the things that could matter. You have to consult with all the people. You have to make sure it fits for all Australians. And that really takes time. And you kind of want a government that does do that doesn't just jump at the idea of a new thing and just puts out there and kind of rushes to do stuff. So it was quite humbling and a good learning for me to realize that the government is not slow because it's slow. It's slow because that's how you build good things, by taking the time, and the people there inside of it are deeply passionate about it. of course, the flip side of that is what has been, I guess, an interesting learning for me is I came into the National AI Center and said, well, great, okay, I'm the head of the National AI Center. I'll have this sort of absolute responsibility for figuring out what is needed for the nation to do AI. And I think I got very quickly schooled on the fact that government is, a silly as it sounds, a highly democratic process that is the run through a process of many leaders and many decision points. And so I guess I kind of realized that it's not the one man show. It is actually a process of democracy. And it means that you really have to learn to not hold on to ideas, because your ideas are not always the right ideas or the best ideas. They might actually, someone can tell you that, there are better ways or different or more appropriate ways based on where we're at. And I think that was I guess it was a hard lesson to learn, that, you're not in charge of anything really.
That was super refreshing, Lee. Thank you so much for joining us on the ROI from AI podcast. I have to say,
My
you're one
pleasure.
of my favorite guests that we've had on the show. And
Oh, the first? Is
yeah, it
that
was
why you're saying that?
you're the favorite guest. And
Yeah.
no worries. And yeah, it was just a very human conversation in a way, I guess, having been a CTO before and we're talking about AI, I thought it'd be a lot of talk about technology, but I was really impressed by your personal and human focus on everything. So yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much.
No, my pleasure. Yeah, I mean, look, I love the technology, but I think I've kind of come to realize that technology is just a thing that helps people. It's not a thing that replaces or augments people in some sort of, shifting of the guard, and the robots are taking over way. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Lee. See you, Andrew.
Thanks, guys.